I'm here with Joe Gallina, the founder of the To Activism Legal Newsletter. Now, Joe, this has been a terrible week for the former president. What just happened in the E. Jean Carroll case? She just took to Twitter to say Trump has 1 week to pay. Can you break us down what's happening in that case?
Absolutely. It is hard to underscore just what a financial crunch Donald Trump has just found himself in. Forget the Supreme Court and the immunity case. We'll talk about that later. But Donald Trump has a really pressing financial crunch that he's facing. And I'll explain why. There's two reasons. First of all, in his New York case, he was found liable for $454 million in his civil fraud case. That money would normally have been due by March 25 because he's appealing the decision. So typically the way it works is you get a judgment and then you have to put up some amount of money as a good faith sort of showing that you will pay the judgment even if you lose the appeal, sort of the requirement. So you either have to put the full amount up or you request from the judge a bond, which is like a smaller amount of money that just shows that you do intend to pay the full amount. Well, the court in this case rejected his request for a bond. They said no to $100 million. And Associate Judge Anil Singh wrote, "You're responsible for every penny of the $454 million if you want to appeal this thing." And basically that gives Donald Trump until March 25 to come up with almost $500 million in the New York trial. Concurrently, at the same time, Donald Trump is now responsible for the E. Jean Carroll verdict, which was $83 million. And he's trying the same thing. His lawyers have requested from the E. Jean Carroll judge that he pay a bond of a smaller amount of money. And basically, E. Jean Carroll's attorneys have filed a motion, a memorandum, saying, no, just like New York, we think Donald Trump should have to put up the full amount of money for a bunch of reasons. First, he's never indicated that he could even pay both of these judgments together, let alone the $83 million. And he has never given full access to his funds and how much liquid cash he has. And basically his whole argument is, trust me, bro, I could pay. It's not going to cut it. And now he has to come up with basically $500 million by March 25, or he's in serious trouble.
So what happens if he can't pay these $500 million in judgments by these dates?
Well, in New York, the sheriff would have to enforce the judgment, and Attorney General Letitia James already made it clear that she's prepared to force sale his assets in order to satisfy the judgment. So basically means that by March 25, if Donald Trump doesn't put $454 million up, that means Letitia James is coming for his buildings and has every right, every New York legal right to sell buildings in order to satisfy the judgment.
And so that can also happen in the E. Jean Carroll case this month as well?
Absolutely. He has to pay that $83 million unless the court finds that he could pay a lesser amount. I personally, based on what the New York reasoning and Justice Singh's decision, I think it's very likely the judge in the E. Jean Carroll case is going to say, no, you have to put up this money too.
Fascinating. So they will be able to go after his assets and force sell his assets if he doesn't come up with over $500 million, which all indications are he doesn't have that money. Now, the Supreme Court judgment, or the Supreme Court's reviewing his claim of presidential immunity. They just told us that yesterday or 2 days ago. What does that mean for his state cases and his federal cases, if anything?
Well, first and foremost, the immediate effect of the Supreme Court's decision to hear the immunity case is that it pushes back his federal criminal cases. But of course, there's some important things to note. So I think Donald Trump's ploy, Donald Trump's sort of plan is to delay his trials until after the election. From an American people standpoint, I think we have a right to know whether or not he's guilty of these crimes, whether or not he launched an insurrection, whether he interfered with our election the last time, and whether he hid classified documents. So I think that's his game. He wants to delay it. Now, interestingly, however, the Supreme Court typically comes out with decisions within their term, and the Supreme Court term ends in June. So whether or not his actual criminal trials are delayed until the disposition of the Supreme Court decision, the Supreme Court's going to come out with their decision in June. So American voters will know that the Supreme Court basically has given Donald Trump absolute immunity from his criminal trials. And I think that could actually hugely backfire against him. I don't think that will happen in this case. I think that there's nowhere, first of all, there's nowhere in the Constitution that says a president is above the law. Also, I think that we may see some limits. We may see the Supreme Court say, well, a president is immune when he's acting or she's acting within their authority as president, and this may apply and that may apply. I don't necessarily see a blanket where they're going to find the president as a sovereign above the, the ability to commit a crime. I think they're going to find a president can commit a crime because the alternative is ludicrous. The examples that were given in the appellate court was that a president could then kill his opponent and literally get away with it. So there has to be some sort of legal, end there. Their president can, of course, commit a crime. So I don't think the Supreme Court will completely wipe away all his trials, but I think there could be movement in Donald Trump's direction. Your second part of the question, I was going to say about the state cases. The second part of your question was what happens with the state cases. And as of now, those would remain outside the auspices of the Supreme Court decision. The Supreme Court, generally speaking, would be speaking to his federal criminal cases. But don't forget, Donald Trump has 2 state criminal cases, one in Georgia and one in New York. And at least now, legal experts are saying that those would continue just as they were planned, especially the one in New York, because it involves potential. The charges occurred before Donald Trump was even president. It happened when he was a presidential candidate and worked with Michael Cohen to pay off Stormy Daniels and is now accused of forging business documents. And so if he wasn't even president when that happened, it's very hard to believe that even if the Supreme Court found the president is immune, it wouldn't have any bearing on citizen Trump before he was elected.
Now, what do you make of the timing of this SCOTUS decision? Couldn't they have announced this sooner that they were going to take the case? Do you think they're helping Trump with this timing? What's going on here?
Well, here's the thing. I think a lot of people were disappointed when they first heard that the Supreme Court was taking the case in the first place, because it felt like it gave credence to Donald Trump's ludicrous arguments that he was absolutely immune of all crimes, right? But I don't think that's quite happening here. And I think it's important to remember that Jack Smith himself actually requested the Supreme Court to hear this case. And the issue is because they do come up, the immunity question does come up. There is certain times where a president is immune in his decision-making abilities. And so I think having some sort of decision that is historic, that addresses this question, having it on the books will help Jack Smith sort of hone in on his case, and he can make arguments that then President Trump, went beyond the scope of what the Supreme Court is finding where the immunity lies. So I think that if we look at it clinically, we'll see that it's probably not a horrible thing to have some sort of precedent on these issues. The scary thing, however, is that A, the conservatives have a supermajority in the court, and B, 3 of the justices that are currently on the Supreme Court were appointed by Donald Trump, which I think is entirely inappropriate. You would think in any sane world, those judges would have recused themselves. And so we're dealing with a situation now where 3 judges that Donald Trump approved are going to be deciding whether or not he can be held criminally liable. It's absolutely ridiculous. So that reason is my biggest reason why I think that this was a mistake. But we're just going to have to see how it plays out.
Like you said, if we were living in a sane world, which since Donald Trump has come on the scene, has not been a sane world at all. Joe, thanks so much for joining us. Joe Gallina with the Call to Activism Legal Newsletter. With Really Legal, I'm Justin Horwitz. Be sure to like, subscribe, hit notifications. We've got a ton planned going into the election, and we're going to keep you up to date on all things going on with Trump's legal woes from now through November. Thanks so much.
Thanks for having me, Justin.